Parasites. Humanity had diverged into two separate lineages on their world. On one hand, there were several races of almost Australopithecine cripples, degraded by the Q for managing to turn back their initial wave of invasion. Yet simple atavism was too light a punishment for them. Their twisted relatives, the parasite, made up the second part of their sentence. There were actually several kinds of parasitic X people, ranging from tortoise-sized ambulatory vampires to the most common fist-sized variety that lived attached to their host. There were even tiny endoparasitic kinds that infested the wombs of their female victims like ghastly living abortions. All of these evolutionary tortures were played out under the careful scrutiny of the Q for 40 million years. The punishment was so baroque, so elaborate, that most of the artificial parasite-host relationships died out when the Q left. Some submen learned to cleanse their tick-like relatives by drowning, burning, or even eating them. Others, like the vaginal parasites, died out as their aggressive method of parasitism effectively sterilized their host. Yet one or two varieties did manage to cling on to their host with abdominal suckers, muscular, gripping limbs, and sterile, pain-soothing saliva. But their success did not lie entirely in the strength of their parasitical advantages. They also learned to regulate their dumb hosts, not killing them by over-infestation and thus ensuring their own long-term survival as well. In any case, totally single-sided relations were rare in any ecology, natural or artificial. In millennial cycles, the cousin species' vicious parasitism began to give way into something more beneficial for both sides. Symbiotes, descendants of the parasites. As time passed, the relationships between the parasites and their hosts got connected to such a degree that it began to involve a cooperation of the individuals. There were no longer single-sided relationships. In exchange for the host's nutritious blood, the parasites offered their heightened senses as early warning against predators and other hazards. A great arms race of symbiotic relationships thus commenced. Certain parasites offered their host larger eyes, others sharper senses of smell, hearing, or even additional defensive weapons in the shape of venomous saliva, malodorant sprays, or an extra bite. The host returned the favor with longer running legs, stronger bodies, and specialized ergonomic nesting sites rich in blood vessels and covered in insulating fur. Different complexes of parasites and host species evolved, compatible only amongst themselves. The development of such creatures was in a way reminiscent of the great modular colonies, thriving on their own world light years away. But unlike the modulars, the components of the symbiotes belonged to a different species, instead of modified variations of the same basic organism. In eventuality, both relationships led to the same point: sentience. In the secluded forests of a certain continent, a new parasitic species developed. They did not have the ballistic poison sprays, infectious stings, or the grossly hypertrophied arm claws of their relatives. Instead, these parasites offered a simpler bargain: an ability to think in return for total submission. Initially, this relationship was more like a horse and its rider. But after a few 100,000 years, the symbiotes could manipulate their hosts like puppets through a combination of tactile and olfactory signals. A few more millennia, and these combined beings developed an order not unlike our own, complete with countries, politics, and even war, albeit reduced in the newly globalizing world culture. In this age, technology filled most functions of the host, but a thriving husbandry of these creatures still remained due to tradition and simple efficiency. An average symbiote would begin the day on his business host and move on to a more comfortable domestic one when they returned home after work. And perhaps on the olfactory television, he would smell news of the evacuations of the million-year-old Q ruins, of the marvelous discoveries salvaged from the Starman wrecks, or of the enormous radio arrays that rose everywhere to listen to the stars. It was a pattern that was being repeated all over.